Hi again, Dan Cutterford here, and I'm going to be running through some stuff that I've been working on lately. It's to try and tie in Identity Services Engine with the ScanSafe solution via the ISR G2 router. You're probably all aware, if you're watching this video, of numerous different ways that you can deploy the ScanSafe service. You can use the legacy methods like the connector or the PIM login script. There's that pretty cool integration into the AnyConnect client, which has been expanded to Mac OS X clients as well. And then there's also what we call appliance integration, which is more on the hybrid side of things, but it can be looked into include the ISR integration as well. So this is whereby any ISR G2 router running 15.1 code up with a K9 security license can basically authenticate traffic, and it can pass on external web traffic to the ScanSafe service without the need for PIM, without the need for the connector, without the need for pack files, and so on. It's sort of like WCCP to the cloud. But the problem with this is when we look into more of the distributed networks, and especially customers that might be using ISE, the ISR integration from ScanSafe doesn't have any knowledge of guest users in any other way that somebody would authenticate. Also, the way that the ISR integration for ScanSafe authenticates users is using IP admission rules. And it's very likely that if somebody has ISE, that they're using 802.1x and they're incompatible. And the only way of doing something like that together would be doing double authentication. So you'd have to have your users authenticate onto the network through ISE and then onto ScanSafe, either using PIM or the connector or something, which isn't wonderful news for anybody. So what I've got here in this proof of concept, here's my environment. Everything's behind an ASA, and then I have my ISE server here. It's actually running on the VM platform outside of the ISR. So the ISR is natting all of my traffic behind it. In this example, I'm going through a cat switch just to show that it's possible to do this in a more distributed environment with wireless LAN controllers and everything. But I could plug straight into the ISR router if I'm running the latest ISR code, which is 15.2 something. You can get it on CCO, which allows ISE to authenticate traffic into different VLANs, which I'll show you in a moment. So I'll be playing the part of this blue user down here, and you can see here that I've set up some different VLANs that I could potentially be joining dependent on how I authenticate using .1x to ISE. Okay, let me just show you or take you through some of the basics of how I've set up ISE here. I'll take you into the policy. My authentication policy is fairly simple. Anywhere that I'm using .1x, I want to be authenticating using AD1, which is the, for me, it's going to be the AD environment that I've configured. Assuming that they authenticate correctly, they'll then go over to the authorization. And here you can see that I've set up some different rules dependent on whether they've, let me expand this rule for you, what AD group they're in. So there's a few different AD groups: contractors, developers, HR group, and then there's a test group. And depending on the AD group that that user's in, then I'm giving them a different policy element. Let me show you what those policy elements look like. So I'll go over to policy elements, results. I'm interested in the authorization results and the authorization profiles. And you can see in here something like my dev authorization policy, when it loads up, is popping them in VLAN 3, and then HR is a different VLAN, and so on. Word of warning, you'll probably know if you're reading the release notes that the latest ISR code does allow for ISE, or the radius really, to put traffic into different VLANs. It does not allow on certain ISR platforms for the downloadable ACL function. So you're going to have to sort of develop all your VLANs and then use that to determine where traffic can be segmented rather than taking the downloadable ACL approach. So as I said, I'm playing the part here of one of these users. Right now I'm logged in via .1x as HR, and I've been given one of the VLANs from HR. If I go over and have a look at my switch, you'll see here that fair enough, I'm plugged into this gig 01 and I'm given the VLAN here of HR. There's a cool website that you should be aware of if you're going through the ScanSafe service called whoami.scansafe.net. And if I refresh this, it saves me from having to sort of go and wait sort of 5 minutes, go in the scan center and have a look. But I can see all the information that ScanSafe is seeing. And it's seeing the internal IP address as the username. I'm not doing any user authentication on the ISR. So it's seeing that, fair enough, that matches to the IP address that I have here. And the group that it sees here, this is the group that is related to the license key that I generated for the ISR. So it's not necessarily a group related from ISE, it's just the license key for everybody on the ISR, nothing special there. So what I can do is I can masquerade as a different user here. Let me disconnect and re-authenticate over .1x as, say, a contractor. I should have set up some debugging here. So you can see there fairly quickly the .1x debug on the switch. It's put me in VLAN 2. Less quick is OSX in now grabbing an IP address over DHCP. Seems to take a while. Anyone who has to connect to Blizzard frequently knows about this pain, but it's probably got to get self-assigned IP address, and then it's got to get one of the VLAN IP addresses. There's the self-assigned. Now it's just waiting for DHCP. Okay, but the instant I authenticated, I was really in that VLAN, just DHCP didn't pick it up. And straight away you see that my new username is populated across to ScanSafe. So in a way that's fairly good. You know, I can go in a scan center and I could set up different groups in scan center related on the internal IP addressing, and then say, well, you know, this is my guest VLAN, they can go to certain websites. This is my contractor VLAN, they can go to other websites. But a better way would be to use group assignment in the VLANs themselves to populate some more friendly names up to Scan Center, so then you can use those as groups. And I can do that within the ISR. So in this example, the ISR is acting as my VTP server. But as I said, you could you could do all this plugged directly into an ISR. You don't have to be using a switch for this. And let's have a look at how one of my VLANs is configured. So let's have a look at VLAN 2. So VLAN 2 here is not the right VLAN. It's better. Let's have a look at VLAN 3 then. VLAN 3, and it was the right VLAN, here is configured, and you see VLAN 2 as well, and why not, let's have a look at VLAN 4. So they're all configured with the appropriate IP address and the access group and the NATing, and the helper IP address there is ISE, so it's aware of any internal IP addresses and so on that it might be forwarding. What I want to do is go and configure these interfaces. Start with VLAN 2, and I want to configure them with a user group default, and then I get to give it a name. So VLAN 2 in my example, I believe, is being used for contractors. In fact, let me confirm this before I commit to this. This is a pain. Oh, there you go. So VLAN 2 is for contractors. So I'm going to configure VLAN 2 with a username, say contract VLAN, or this is the group name, sorry. Interface VLAN 3 will give the user group name for developers, and VLAN 4 we're going to give the user group name for HR. Okay, and that's all I need to do. Now, without doing anything else, I can go over here and refresh UMI.scansafe.net, and I can see that because I'm going through the contractor VLAN, it's automatically just added in that extra group. And I can then go into Scan Center and use that for different policies, different reports, and so on. The limitation here, of course, is that I'm having to manually assign these groups to the VLAN. There isn't any direct AD integration. In fact, I've got a list here of a few limitations. I'll bring them up now. So it requires that the ISRG2 router be in NAT mode, and that's a limitation of the ScanSafe ISR integration in general. There's no username granularity that we're seeing here. You do get that internal IP address, but all I'm passing up is a VLAN group. And because of that, there's no direct AD integration. You know, you could match one for one those VLANs to AD groups, but you can't pass more than one group. And interestingly, the ISR will not provide ICE with the IP address given to that endpoint. So you'd say, well, that's not too bad. I could maybe correlate some of the logs up in Scan Center to what I'm seeing in ICE. Well, unfortunately, the limitation, because ISR is seen as a WAN router, at the moment it doesn't provide the IP address, only the MAC address, and so on. When it loads up, it'll probably show you what I mean. So you could do some correlation of the logs, but that's a limitation. That's a feature request on both sides to get additional functionality within ScanSafe for ISR. There you go, there's no IP address being shown there. And within ICE for the WAN routers.